I started hearing footsteps in my attic every night around 2 a.m. When I finally went up there, I found a blanket, food cans, and photos of me sleeping. This happened about a year ago, when I was living alone for the first time in my life. I had just rented a small one-story house a few miles outside of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet, affordable, and surrounded by tall trees that blocked most of the street noise. The landlord told me the place came with a large attic, but he said it hadn't been used in years, mostly just old insulation and a few boxes. At first, I loved the peace and privacy. I could stay up late, play games, or watch movies without anyone complaining. The first week was uneventful, though every now and then, I'd hear the wood creak above me, small pops and groans that I chalked up to the house settling. Then, one night around 1 a.m., I woke up to a sound that didn't fit. It wasn't a creak or a thump. It was a step, slow, heavy, deliberate, followed by another, and then another. The sound was coming from directly above my bedroom. I stared at the ceiling, holding my breath. After about 30 seconds, it stopped. I told myself maybe a raccoon had gotten in, or a branch had fallen on the roof. Still, I barely slept the rest of the night. The next day, I checked the attic entrance, one of those pull-down ladders in the hallway ceiling. It looked normal. I even tapped it with a broom handle. No movement, no sound. For a few days, things stayed quiet. Then, about a week later, it started again, the footsteps, but louder. Sometimes it was a dragging noise, like something being pulled across the floor. Other times I'd hear a soft shuffle, as if someone was pacing. On the fifth night of this, I decided to check. I grabbed my flashlight, slid a chair under the attic door, and pulled down the ladder. The smell hit first: dust, old wood, and something faintly sour. I climbed up, sweeping the flashlight across boxes and insulation. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place. But when I reached the far corner, I froze. There was a blanket spread out neatly on the floor, with a few empty water bottles beside it and a single open can of food. Someone had been living there. My chest tightened. I climbed down as quietly as I could, locked every door and window, and called the landlord. He sounded just as shocked as I was. He swore only he and I had keys. He said he'd come by in the morning with a locksmith. That night was the longest of my life. I sat in bed with a kitchen knife, every light on. For hours, the house stayed silent. But around 3 in the morning, I heard something new breathing. It wasn't above me this time. It was right outside my bedroom door. Slow, steady breathing, like someone trying not to be heard. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. After what felt like an eternity, the breathing stopped. I waited another 10 minutes before I finally gathered the courage to step out of bed. The hallway was empty. The front and back doors were still locked. But I noticed something strange: the attic ladder was pulled down halfway. I slept in my car until sunrise. When the landlord arrived, he brought a police officer with him. They both climbed up into the attic while I waited on the porch. I could hear them moving things around for several minutes. Then the officer called the landlord over, and everything went quiet. When they came down, the officer's face was pale. He asked me to stay outside for a moment. Then he showed me something I'll never forget. They had found a loose wooden panel in the attic wall. Behind it was a small crawlspace barely big enough for a person to fit inside. Inside that space were dozens of photos of me sleeping. Every single one had been taken from above, through the small vent that connected my bedroom ceiling to the attic. Some of them were close-ups, my eyes closed, my arm hanging off the bed, and one looked like it had been taken just a few nights before. There were also food wrappers, a flashlight, and a small backpack with toiletries. The police said whoever had been living there had probably been sneaking in and out through a narrow vent near the back of the house. It led straight to the roof, which backed up to a wooded area. The worst part? There were fingerprints on the inside of the attic hatch, fresh ones. They dusted for prints but couldn't match them to anyone in the database. Apparently, whoever it was had been watching me for weeks, maybe longer, and had chosen nights when I left for work to move around. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. The next morning, I hired movers and packed everything I owned. I never went back to that house again. A few days later, the landlord called. He said he'd been cleaning the attic after the police left and found one more thing tucked under the blanket, a folded piece of paper. On it were 3 words written in shaky pencil. You were fun. Even now, a year later, I can't sleep if I hear a noise from the ceiling. I've changed apartments twice since then. I always check every vent, every crawl space, every attic door before signing a lease. People always joke about someone living in the attic like it's an urban legend. But after what happened, I can promise you, sometimes it's not a story. Sometimes the person watching you is closer than you think.